Any questions from anyone here? Yes.
How close are they to getting this select committee up and running? And if they're not, why not?
Go ahead. Well, as I said, they have 190 people who have signed on to H.R. 36, the Frank Wolf bill. You want to?
They need 218.
Right, they need 218. So if you mean numerically.
That's like, that's a year, almost, it's 15 months. I mean, it's taking an awful long time, and why?
Right. Go ahead.
I might add to that a little bit. When the president signed the intelligence finding for Libya, which he did in the early part of 2011, early months of the uprising, he essentially was authorizing covert assistance to known al-Qaeda figures and militias. That properly would have been briefed to what is called the Gang of Eight or the Super Eight in Congress. That top leadership, if indeed received that brief, has what might be called guilty knowledge. They have not moved to allow a select committee. In particular, Speaker Boehner has blocked that, refused to call it. And one has to wonder if it has to do with them having received some measure of briefing about this, about what was going on in Libya, about our U.S. policy to help and facilitate the arming of al-Qaeda. That is a question mark, but can enter into our thoughts about why the select committee has not been called.
So what's the answer over and above that? Because what you're describing today is it's treason. I mean, it's not even un-American, it's insane. I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, utterly insane.
Sounds like a good headline.
Yeah, and if I may, is this on?
Please, yeah.
As I tried to just point out, what matters, so many things that matter to me. One of the most important things, though, is that really a year ago, we had a story. That's all we had. We had a lot of views, we had a lot of ideas, this is what we think, this is what he thinks, but it's not where we are anymore. We can give you a plethora, more information than you could go through in weeks, linking everyone that we have mentioned, and how Claire keeps it and keeps it straight in her mind just continues to amaze me. The point is, please understand, this is not a story. We're not here telling you a story that is no longer supported. This is real. One other thing that I want to point out. People talk about, over the last year, I hear people disparaging the FBI, the CIA, other intelligence agencies for not doing, or couldn't they have done, or shouldn't they have done. It's very important that everyone understands and differentiates. The men and the women of the FBI are the very finest in the world. The men and the women of the CIA are the best in the world. All of our intelligence agencies, the men and women who comprise them, are incredible. We really are the best. What we're talking about here is lack of leadership, or leadership, to use your words, it's treasonous to some. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that to repeat what you said. Some look at it as treasonous moves. And our men and women had to follow what many qualify as treasonous moves.
Well, I'm saying if we switch sides, that's what you said. I mean, that's treason. I'm just wondering also, they say that the reason, if there's a con-op, the reason all these people can't come forward is because of the nature of what they're doing. They can't. They have to keep quiet. So it's almost like it's like brilliantly conceived that everybody has to keep quiet. The Congress, nobody can talk. So, but you have.
Great point. And if I may, excuse me. So. A few months ago, I actually said, whenever our last one was, I pointed out that, in my humble opinion, this was a FUOP that was so well planned from A to Z, a future operation. Somebody sat down, and the guys that taught me would have been proud. This is not a bunch of 20-something assistants to Hillary Clinton or anyone else that put this together. These are very, very sophisticated. They understand all the PSYOP side, the CONOP side, the FUOP, all of this. This is not make-believe. This didn't just happen. However, I do agree with Admiral Lyons. Something went terribly wrong. We don't know we theorize what perhaps could have been something that was supposed to take place on this op. But something went terribly wrong, no matter what.
You know, in terms of switching sides, as you mentioned, and as you know, I've titled this piece of mine that was published today, "Material Support to Terrorism," and I opened this piece that I wrote with excerpts from the law, from the U.S. Criminal Code, which criminalizes the supports, the material support to terrorism, and it's very explicitly defined what constitutes material support, which is quite a lot, is just about anything. Now, a lawyer might take issue with that and say, well, if the president issued a presidential finding, an intelligence finding, perhaps that overrules U.S. Criminal Code. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't tell you where that would come down on which side, but that is an argument that you might consider.
And I just have one more question, because I'm not going to monopolize this, but it seems like if nobody can talk, then our only hope is eyewitnesses who weren't Americans. And I am aware that there are eyewitnesses like your FBI informant, like somebody I'm told who witnessed in the neighborhood what was an orderly procession out of the special mission. It was very strange at that time, which would have been, they had rehearsed it. There was something,
Well, as someone who's watched this, develop for a year and tried to connect the dots, and I think maybe your answer is here today, that what's happened till now is that too many of the leaders have looked at this as a political football. And everybody's back and forth on the YouTube video and talking about the politics of this. What we're trying to say here today is you have to get well beyond that. You have to dig deeper. The story, the deeper you get, the dirtier it gets. And I think that the whole purpose is that the story has to be put out in a factual, nonpartisan way. The people who were a part of it, people like myself, have stepped forward trying to do just that. And when it gets out there, then we trust the American people and their elected representatives will do the right thing. And I think that's really what has to happen, because you're right, there are people whose careers are being held hostage by saying if you talk, including the victims, the people who were evacuated, the people who were injured, none of them are being allowed to talk as well. But if we do get into a special committee, and there are things of truly national security implications, that special committee can take classified testimony, it can go into closed session. So it needs that authority and that ability to make those judgments, and then the truth will come out.
Ken.
Admiral Kubik, I've got a kind of detailed question for you. I unfortunately walked in kind of in the middle of your presentation, and you were talking about the efforts at the beginning of the Libyan revolution to negotiate a way out for Gaddafi. There were reports at the time, I can remember reporting on that at the time, of a Wells Fargo registered private jet that flew into Tripoli. Was that part of this operation? We never got to the bottom of that story.
No.
It seemed like there were Americans on board that aircraft. There was an audio that we had at the time of them getting landing clearance to go into Tripoli. So that was
not part of what I was involved in. That may have come later. I know of one attempt after the fact, but it was much too late by that point in time. The parties had just closed the window and were now dug in and fighting. But that was not part of what I was involved in.
And was Mark Allen involved in this as well? He was the guy who helped on the British side to kind of bring Gaddafi over to give up his weapons.
Not in what I was doing.
Wes.
Yes, this question I think is probably best directed to Mr. Clark. We're talking about accountability here. That's the bottom line on so many fronts. And so many people have been told to shut up or else. Mr. Clark, at what point do we get to the fork in the road where we say, this is where we're going to be, this is where we're going to have to demand some accountability, and what do we, I hesitate to use the word weapons, but what kind of legal weapons will we have to have before we break this thing open and get it all out, let it all hang out, and demand and get the point where the people demand accountability, because we don't have that yet.
My feeling is that the press is the one that has that power to manipulate, to bring things, sorry.
Well said as a lawyer.
To bring things around that way. And I can tell you that whistleblower protection is almost non-existent in this country these days. Very, very difficult area of the law. Now, under the FOIA, the existence of a cover-up can be relevant. So at the appropriate time in the lawsuit, we will be sending out, we'll be making it known that we will be happy to take any affidavits from any whistleblowers who would like to submit it, and we will submit it in federal court. Now that's not, that's not much protection for a whistleblower, but we hope that people will come forward.
Anyone else want to take a shot at it?
Well,
Okay.
let me,
All right.
I think what you've done with the FOIA is really is terrific, John. I think it's a great idea, but it's also tremendously frustrating because you know that the administration can just frustrate all of those efforts. I mean, I put in a number of FOIA requests as well on very specific documents, and they just blow it off. Either they say it's classified and they can't release it for national security reasons, or they deny that the document even exists. So it's a very frustrating thing, and once you get into the litigation side of it, it's very expensive. If you're going into federal court and all that, it gets to be a very expensive and time-consuming process. And what you're talking about is really finding accountability for the American people and for all of the people who care about the military in this country, which still is a large number of Americans. They want to know what happened, why it happened, and why help was not on the way, why that ethos was not respected. I think we will get many answers. I can tell you my own investigation has come up with a detailed narrative which will be coming out in about 2 months, which does answer some of the questions that you raised here. But obviously there are lots of questions that remain to be answered. I wonder what you think about Lynn Westmoreland and his effort that he revealed a couple of days ago of having a kind of ad hoc, it's not a select committee, it's an ad hoc committee that Boehner has apparently allowed him to set up. I mean, is that subject to manipulation?
Well, the Boehners bless that. You won't get what you need.
Well, if they don't have subpoena powers, if they don't have the ability to conduct, long-term, cross-examination, it won't work. But one of the things that you mentioned there, the mere fact that there's now a public listing of all of the FOIA requests, I think, begs then for a select committee to answer the questions raised there. Just the fact that all of these questions have been asked and the process is so lengthy, the only way you're going to get to the bottom of all of those questions is through some sort of a select committee. So I think just the fact that they're out there adds weight to the argument for the committee.
Hey, so can I say one more thing in response to what you were saying, that a commander, a SINC, would have deployed forces and had forces on readiness at a time just so he wouldn't get caught with his pants down. Well, there's an extraordinary statement that the White House put out on September 10th, 2012, saying that they'd taken all of these measures to protect the homeland and our facilities overseas. And really, John Brennan was in charge. Don't worry, America. Everything is under control. We've got Al-Qaeda on the run. Obama killed Osama. The world is a great and wonderful place, and Obama deserves to be reelected. And then what you find out later from the testimony from Dempsey and others, and from General Ham, is that there were no forces put on alert anywhere. There were no forces put on alert.
So the question then, Ken, was there something, I'm just telling you, as our professional military, they are not inept. They would have planned, they would have pre-positioned, they would have had forces on alert. And the question is, what prevented them from doing that? I mean, you know, we're not stupid. We got the best military in the world.
And there was nothing stupid.
Nothing done.
Nowhere.
And that crap that Dempsey put out, well, we were focused on Tunisia. Well, the last time I checked the chart, Tunisia does border Libya. And if he had forces ready to respond in Tunisia, he sure as hell had the same forces for Libya, whatever they were. And they weren't.
Yes.
Back to this business about, I'm sorry, David Martosco with the Daily Mail. Back to this business of the U.S. facilitating arms transfers to al-Qaeda-linked militias and all this. For my audience, who is not incredibly well tuned into all the details of this, would one of you please make it clear to me exactly whom in the Obama administration or the Pentagon or somewhere are you accusing of doing something that treasonous? Exactly whom are you pointing the finger at?
Well, I actually might begin with Britain.
Whom in the United States?
Yes, but the knowledge about who these people were goes back and includes very much so MI6. In the period of the 1990s, people like Abu Anas al-Libi, the LIFG jihadi who was picked up just last year and arrested in Tripoli, spent 5 years in safe haven living in Manchester, UK. Why? Because MI6 wanted to work with him to mount assassination plots against Gaddafi, which he complied with. Unsuccessful attempts. So at the intelligence level of intelligence sharing between our countries, certainly the U.S. intelligence community would have known what MI6 was doing. That would have been shared. So the intelligence committee. Certainly when jihadis like Abu Sufyan bin Kumu were arrested, were detained and picked up in the aftermath of 9/11, bin Kumu got picked up, I think, in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, and were sent to Gitmo. That means that whoever picked him up, the CIA, the U.S. military, which detained him in Gitmo, they all knew who he was, where he had been, and what he had been up to. Abu Anas al-Libi, moreover, had spent time in Sudan with Ayman al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden during the time when they were plotting the eventual 1998 attacks on our two embassies in Eastern Africa, in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. So they are all part of, they all know that.
I'm just interested in the arms. Your biggest accusation here is that the United States government facilitated arms going to al-Qaeda. Who did that? The background. Who did that?
Yeah. All of the above. The intelligence community was part of that, the Department of State was part of that, and certainly that means that the top leadership of the United States, our national security leadership, and potentially Congress, if they were briefed on this, also knew about this, the Super 8, as we said. Remember, again, what we said, these weapons came into Benghazi, were permitted to enter by our armed forces who were blockading the approaches, both air and sea. They were permitted to come in. That means NATO, that means the United States military, that means the Pentagon knew that these weapons were coming in and that it was allowed. We know that our people were on the ground, both State Department and CIA, receiving those weapons off the ships, distributing them to the people that I've just named to you, whom they knew perfectly well, who they were.
Thank you, that's all.
And there was no accountability.
Just to follow up on that, what's the difference between this scenario and other scenarios in the past where the U.S. has sent weapons overseas and they've gone into the wrong hands? Ultimately, weapons are skimmed all the time. It happened with bin Laden, we propped him up. It happened with Noriega. So what's the difference between those scenarios and this one?
September 11, 2001.
You're connecting Libya with September 11, 2001.
I'm connecting Al-Qaeda with September 11, 2001, and the leaders of the Libyan revolution were affiliated with Al-Qaeda. For instance, LIFG and the leadership, Abdul Hakim Belhaj and others of the LIFG, were affiliated with Al-Qaeda because the LIFG itself was formally accepted as a franchise into Al-Qaeda personally by an announcement by Ayman al-Zawahiri in 2007, and the United States government, Department of State, placed the LIFG on the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organizations list the following year, 2008. That's why I'm saying we knew who they were at the time. We knew who they were.
Yes.
And they were Al-Qaeda.
In terms of motives, are you suggesting that this was idiotic strategy, they were trying to do something? Or are you suggesting that they had somehow, that the United States government somehow aligned themselves with Al-Qaeda for some reason? Or was this a stupid strategy to get rid of Gaddafi?
I don't know that we know.
So you actually think there's a possibility that the top echelons of the United States government had adopted the goals of Al-Qaeda?
Well, what we can say for sure is this, that beginning with the Cairo speech of President Obama in 2009, in June of 2009, the U.S. foreign policy was explicitly explained as one of turning a new page or turning over a new leaf with the Islamic world, as it was called.
But that obviously didn't mean that, that doesn't necessarily mean that turning over a new page, a new leaf means aligning with the goals of Al-Qaeda.
I certainly wouldn't think so, but the facts are what the facts are, and we did facilitate the provision of weapons to Al-Qaeda in Libya.
The follow-up question then is that you said it doesn't only go up to the top of the presidential administration. You're saying that this Al-Qaeda influence and the wanting to fund Al-Qaeda goes down to the intelligence services, which you said knowingly operated and gave weapons to Al-Qaeda. So do you believe that this conspiracy goes not only from the president, but down to the intelligence services? They've all potentially adopted the goals of Al-Qaeda?
No, I didn't say that, and I wouldn't say that. You heard what Wayne said about the finest serving Americans, the most patriotic Americans in any of these organizations, FBI, CIA, Department of State. What I'm saying is that U.S. policy in Libya clearly permitted and facilitated the provision of weapons to known al-Qaeda individuals and groups. I leave it to you, to the media, to the press, to the investigative journalists to find out why we did that and exactly how we did that, but we know that it happened. We know that those weapons flowed. We know that they were permitted into Libya by our people, by NATO and our allies. And we know that those weapons found their way to al-Qaeda jihadis. I reference you as well to something else in the packet here, and that is the New York Times article of December 2012, which goes into some detail about how those weapons flowed and to whom they flowed.
And if I may, just one last thing. What we also know, as Admiral Kubik has pointed, he was part of, you're looking at the man who was part of a negotiation that could have stopped all of this. It was going to happen. It's not maybe. It was going to happen. All it took was an okay, was a green light from somebody like a Hillary Clinton or a President Obama. It took someone at the very top to say yes, and all of his efforts would have been met. What was going to happen after that is anyone's guess. But that would have precluded all of this.
Cliff,
But I think what some of these questions are getting at, in order to understand what's happening here, is why? Why on earth would this policy be set in motion? And I think we need a plausible explanation of this. If so many people were in on it, from the top down to the CIA, into the military, was it designed to curry favor with Al-Qaeda, to let them know, hey, we're not your enemies after all, we're going to help you. We're going to help you take over Libya, and maybe help you in different areas of the Middle East? Or was it, we were so disgusted, we wanted to get rid of Gaddafi so bad, and why? Why would we want to do that when he was basically defanged, he was willing to escape the scene? What is it about why we wanted to get rid of Gaddafi so bad? Did he know something that he didn't, about us, about the U.S., that we didn't want? We need to understand some plausible explanation of what went into this policy supported by the intelligence community, the military. You just can't blame it on Obama and his pro-Muslim Brotherhood sympathies.
Let me take the first stab at that. You're not unaware of the Muslim Brotherhood penetration into every national security agency of this government and their carte blanche entree into the White House. And just like during the 30s and 40s and 50s, if you compare what went on then to what we're seeing today, that influences our policies, our actions, it is very similar and cannot be dismissed. Nobody wants to talk about it, but that's what happened then, and that's what's happening now. The Muslim Brotherhood didn't want to see Gaddafi there. They wanted him out. How much influence did that have on our policies? You've got to go in and dig and ask and find out.
Admiral, as a follow-up, though, is General Petraeus, who was at the CIA, is he influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood now? Hillary Clinton? Are all?
Well, I think General Petraeus was influenced by a few other things.
But not.
You know, let's say he's hanging out there on the end of the limb.
That's a joke, but
Well, look, you know, you got him penetrated in every organization. You had them same way in the 30s, 40s, 50s. It influenced, look, you know.
These organizations are presumably not, tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. There may be infiltration, but they ultimately made the decision. Are they paper tigers?
They're not paper tigers. You go look at the Muslim Brotherhood creed, which came out.
Is General Petraeus and all the leaders in the intelligence community so easily influenced that you can get them to overthrow a government because they're...
I don't think that wasn't his decision.
It's not an easy process at all. And if you would, pick up a packet there is an article in here, and there are references to other articles in here that will trace for you the multi-decade effort and campaign by the Muslim Brotherhood to infiltrate American society and government and intelligence. It's not simple, and it didn't happen overnight. And it's not just the current administration. This goes back decades. And the program was laid out. We have the documents of the Muslim Brotherhood's, their own documents describing what they are doing and how they intend to infiltrate society and government. We have those because of law enforcement raids on various places, homes and other places where the documents were collected. We have the example of the Holy Land Foundation trial with all these documents. This is the history. This is how it happened. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple, but it did happen.
One last question. How does this narrative play into what we believe we know from reporting that Obama was reluctant to go into Libya, and it was pressure by Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and others who are known as humanitarian interventionists? They want to go in because they were afraid what was going to happen in Benghazi. That ultimately pushed him along, and supposedly he was reluctant to do so. How does this Muslim Brotherhood influence narrative square with that?
Well, what I can tell you is that some of the strongest influence of the Muslim Brotherhood occurs not necessarily only in the Oval Office, but also in the White House at the National Security Council. I will tell you that one of the closest advisors to the National Security Council of the United States is an imam by the name of Imam Mohammed Majid. Majid is the president of an organization called ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial of 2008, and also a top advisor to the Department of Homeland Security, as well as to the National Security Council. So the influence is not simply on the White House or the Oval Office or the President, but throughout the top levels of American policymaking circles.
As is CARE, one of the unindicted co-conspirators, and so on.
Do we know who overruled Admiral Ham when he said that, so there's no accountability, so we don't have any way of knowing that, which is, because you said, you asked, it was above AFRICOM. but it's just sort of a mystery as to who called that.
Right, when I got the call, was actually Lieutenant Colonel Linville who called me and told me the truce was off. And again, I probed and said, well, who made the decision? Did General Ham make the decision? Did he change his mind? We knew all through it that General Ham was having a difficult time getting support above his, from his superiors, and he took some risks himself to move forward to try to get the discussions, including the ask for a show of good faith by pulling the troops back, and that happened. Lieutenant Colonel Linville was obviously upset when I talked about how I wasn't going to stop there, that I was going to drive up to Washington and find out who did it. He said, my advice to you is to drop it. We've all been told to stand down. This came from the top. And what you'll find out was only 2-3 days later that General Ham was taken out of command. AFRICOM's command was shifted to European command, and NATO and Admiral James Stavridis then took command of the operation, and General Ham and that whole group was then moved away from the whole operation 2 days after the truce talks.
Let me add one thing. When Ham got that call, he would have made the call to Dempsey.
Mm-hmm.
His POLAD would have made the call to State.
Please, this is another member of our commission, Jack Shaw. Jack, why don't you step up here?
Give us your full name, please.
It's John A. Shaw, Jack Shaw. I've been in 3 White Houses. I've been in senior positions at Defense, State, elsewhere. My thought in this is that the whole thrust of the conspiracy thought that's being raised is, on one hand, reasonable enough, but change the scenario just a little bit and think about going back to the Nixon days and assuming that you somehow had insights into what was happening in the Oval Office and in the corridors of power, and we didn't find out until we had tons of tapes of anything that was really going on there that had anything to do with what our suppositions were. And this is even, if it is possible, this is even more complex and maybe even worse than what we were dealing with there. So it's, from an intellectual standpoint, to try and comprehend it is a secondary thing. Just trying to put the pieces together where we know we have some truth that we're playing with is the first step. And I'm sort of with you. Let's go and look at who was saying what to whom, what were the real elements. We don't have any insight into that right now at all.
Proofs of that, because we had a stable Syria, Libya, excuse me, and then because of this, we have $1 billion worth of arms, half of which are sold for cash. $500 million, this is the news today, is in the hands of Al Qaeda. And what are they doing with it?
Muslim Brotherhood. They're going to Syria.
Right. So that's...
Well, all of these things have a life of their own. You can go back, at the amount of weaponry that came out of Iraq that went into Syria, including chemical weapons, that has surfaced again. No one's asking the questions about that either. I mean, the point is that these are jug bands that are off going playing themselves once they're on the move. So it is a puzzlement, and it ain't going to be solved easily.
Let me just weigh in for just a second on this. First of all, I think it's really important to push aside the word conspiracy that was used here, because this is not a conspiracy. This is what you're seeing. What you're talking about are facts and policies. It's not a conspiracy. They're facts and policy. Number one, you know that weapons went into Libya, and you know that weapons went in to arm the Libyan rebels. Those are facts. Yeah, but that's not a conspiracy. That's not a conspiracy. Those are facts. Those are facts. The second thing is, and I would ask you what your opinion is on this, there seems to be a pretty wide consensus that there was a presidential finding which changed U.S. policy to arm the Libyan rebels in the beginning of the revolt against Gaddafi. That is a policy. That's not a conspiracy. That's policy. All right. Now the question is, was there another finding later on to arm the Syrian rebels? I'd be curious to hear what you think of what you feel about that. Was there a presidential finding to arm the Syrian rebels from weapons that were picked up from the battlefield in Libya?
You might look at a CNN report that came out in August of 2012, and I can't remember the exact title of it. But in that report, and if you Google something like Presidential Findings CNN August 2012, you'll get it, and it reports that there were 2 presidential findings, just as you suggest. One was for Libya, and that came out in, I think it was late March of 2011, and one for Syria, and that came out in the early part of 2012.
I'd like to go back to the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration part of this. If there's so much Muslim Brotherhood infiltration in the U.S. government, why did the U.S. government sit by when the Egyptian military overthrew a Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt?
Well, I'm not sure that's a completely accurate way to describe it. In the first place, we know again that U.S. policy was strongly to support the Muslim Brotherhood and the government of Mohamed Morsi when he was elected in mid-2012. And the relationship between his government and ours for the year or so that he remained in power was close. As a matter of fact, getting to Admiral Lyon's point about the potential that there was a kidnapping effort against the Ambassador Stevens, we know that in mid-2012, a delegation came from Egypt, actually, headed by another terrorist organization and individual. The terrorist organization was Gamma Islamiyah. The representative was Hani Noor Eldin. And they had entree into the National Security Council and the White House to plead the case for the release of the blind sheikh by way of showing how close the relationship was at that time. When the Egyptian people rose up about a year later, this is late June and into early days of July of 2013, last year, it was a massive uprising by the Egyptian people. I mean, millions and millions of people were in the streets clamoring for the overthrow, for the replacement of the Morsi regime. Now, we can say it was because they were bad administrators. They took a bad economy and ran it into the ground even worse. People were without jobs, without bread, etc. We can talk about the reasons, but the people of Egypt rose up to overthrow that government. And I don't think that we or anyone else could very well have stood in their way.
Just a point on Cairo. I've spent a lot of time in Cairo, have a lot of friends there as well. Morsi was elected by a coalition that really thought that he was going to bring change, that he really was a moderate. The people, by his actions, vis-a-vis their Supreme Court, their legislature, he basically backed away from his coalition and went right to his base, of the Muslim Brotherhood, alienating the people. And what began over the course of a year was an unlikely coalition between secular Muslims, between Coptic Christians who were being killed and tortured, and between the Sufis, who are basically the far, extreme spiritual, Muslims, and they decided they had had enough. They turned out 22 million people in Cairo and 35 countrywide, and what was seen as, it wasn't really well reported, but in that demonstration, a large number of women came out, and for the first time, they were allowed to demonstrate along with the men. It was overwhelming. The military looked at it. They also had evidence that Morsi was building up his own private militia, his own private army, and in the neighborhoods in Cairo, they were sending suicide bombers in there to cause disruption, but the people found who they were. So it was a total people's rebellion that basically said, get rid of this guy, and they've got a lot of evidence on his crimes as well. So that's what happened, and I don't know that even if our government had decided to step in, they could have stopped it.
They withheld support. So, and remember one other thing, when Morsi came for his visit that summer, his number one objective was the release of the blind sheikh. That followed up Eldon's visit.
You have any more questions here?
What is UAE's role? This might be a stupid question, but they don't have their money. So how are they playing into this? Are they?
I think they might have gotten their money. They may have gotten paid. That was the purpose of that delegation visit to Tripoli. They were very willing to finance this Muslim Brotherhood Al-Qaeda rebellion. They wanted to do it. They obviously fronted the money first and went for payment later. But I believe they got paid.
Final question is, and this may seem far afield, but it just occurred to me, is Al Jazeera's entry into the U.S. media market at all related to any of this? In other words, you got Qatar playing a key role. The arms are going through Qatar into the hands of the jihadists. All of this is happening relatively about the same time when Al Jazeera wants entry into the media market. They pay $500 million to Al Gore and his colleagues. It just seems like it's not only happening abroad, it's happening here. That this policy, however it's rationalized to promote the interests of the Muslim Brotherhood, happens here and abroad.
Well, yes, I mean, you're right, Cliff, absolutely right. We know, of course, that Qatar is a strong backer for the Muslim Brotherhood. The supreme senior jurist of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, has lived there in exile from his home, Egypt, for many, many decades. He has built a media empire, if you will, from that perch in Doha, and has an online interview program on Al Jazeera weekly that draws millions of viewers all over the Middle East, the Arab and the Muslim world. And so even though Qatar, as you know, has had a change of, I guess, leadership with the senior emir abdicating in favor of his younger 5-year-old son or so, the policy of Qatar in support of the Brotherhood seems to still be strong. In addition, there is a think tank, if you will, that was established there last year, or maybe it was 2012, in Qatar, in Doha, Qatar, established by Yusuf al-Qaradawi and the Muslim Brotherhood, and the director of that think tank is none other than Tariq Ramadan, who is the grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. And he runs that think tank as a legal resource for the countries of the, if you will, Arab Spring, who were going to, in the expectation, have new Islamic governance under Sharia. That think tank was formed in order to support them legally with fatwas and legal research and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, all in all, Qatar, including its sponsorship of Al Jazeera, which, by the way, is owned by the emir. It is a royal possession, if you will, tool of media. Shall I say outreach?
And let me add one other thing. You know, this just didn't start in the last 10 years. I'll take you back to Clinton. His #1 Muslim advisor was a guy by the name of Alamundi. And Alamundi is currently serving 23 years in prison for providing funding to Hamas, the terrorist group. Did it through a charity, and this came out at the Holy Land Foundation job. But more importantly on this guy, this is the guy under Clinton that selected the 13 Muslims to come into our chaplain corps in the military. I've been trying to get somebody to vet those 13 who are probably still there, and advising our good friends like Major Hassan on the Holy Quran.
And again, just a quick answer from personal observation. At the beginning of the Libyan revolution, Al Jazeera, to the best that I could determine, was running an information operation. They were running stories where they were supposedly having phone interviews with people who were on the scene who weren't even in Libya. And they were basically reporting, you know, quote, atrocities by Gaddafi's troops. One particular time I got concerned because they were talking about snipers firing on people on a Sunday evening in Green Square in Tripoli. And I had a friend, an American, who I knew was in Tripoli. I called him and I said, we're getting reports, and by the way, Al Jazeera was putting it out, and then CNN was broadcasting the stories with that single source. And I said to him, I said, we're hearing that you're under fire in Green Square, and the revolt is spread to Tripoli. And he said, you got to be kidding. He said, I'm in a hotel, I'm right off of Green Square. It's Sunday night, just like every Sunday night, all the people are out in Green Square, and the kids are setting off firecrackers like they always do. He said there's nothing happening here, but yet Al Jazeera was basically spinning people up by putting it out as a story, and that's from personal observation. So again, draw your own conclusions. Gaddafi had no love for Qatar, and Qatar had no love for him, and I think they were spinning the story to help the revolution.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. Anybody, one more minute comment? Or anyway, what I want to just leave you with is, when you look through this package, you'll see we had these key takeaways on the first page, and we covered about the possible abdication by Gaddafi that Chuck addressed. Claire talked about changing sides in the war on terror and these flow of weapons and who they went to. Ace talked about the dereliction of duty, the failure on the day of to bring our military assets to bear where they could have made a difference. Wayne talked about being a warrior out there. One of them we didn't get to, but you can read about it in the package. And Claire has done an excellent piece about how this whole YouTube video as the basis, as what they went and blamed this whole thing on, was such a farce. And you can go through and see that. Also, I'll let you know this will be up on our website pretty soon at aim.org, and with the Citizens Commission for Benghazi, aim.org/Benghazi. Everybody on the commission's bio, including Jack Shaw, it's in this folder. And if you have any follow-up questions, we'll take a few minutes if you want to come up here now, or follow up with me and we'll get you answers for what we can. But we urge you, stay after it, help us dig the truth out. I mean, we don't have the power to subpoena, but we're here for the long haul with these FOIAs. This takes a long time, but we're here for the long haul. We're going to stay with it. There's a lot of things going on here with Hillary. I think she would like us to go away, but we are not going away. So.